Realms of the Haunting is one of the most unique games I've ever played. I didn't really know a lot about it going in, but I had a bunch of requests to do a video on it, so I looked it up. The cover did look familiar, but other than that, I didn't know much about it, so I figured why not, let's jump into it. And to be honest, it took me a little bit to get into. At first glance, it just looks like a 2.5D Doom-style shooter, and it immediately feels like that classic era of PC games. But then it starts to open up a bit. There's item management, exploration, point-and-click mechanics, puzzles that'll make you go cross-eyed, and a completely wild story. And of course, full-motion video scenes. This was such a unique period for PC games. Developers were experimenting with new technology, mixing genres together, and trying to make games feel more cinematic. And after playing this, it really made me miss those old FMV games. They can be really awkward and all the effects have aged a lot. The performances sometimes go in some weird directions. But there's still so much charm in watching these real actors bring these characters and worlds to life. It gives the game a personality that would be hard to recreate any other way. For everyone who requested this one, I hope it brings back some memories.
Tell us anything about this blade? The Knight's Blade. It will enable you to travel through a gate from the tower into the realm of Rapia.
So let's look at what this game was doing, what the developers were trying to create, how it managed to blend nearly 5 different genres into one experience, and just what was Realms of the Haunting. By the middle of the 90s, Doom had completely changed the direction PC gaming was heading in. It came out in December of '93, and quickly became one of the most influential games of the decade. Its speed, violence, level design, multiplayer, and shareware release all helped it spread, and the technology behind it gave other developers a new way to think about first-person games. For the next several years, just about every first-person action game was labeled a Doom clone. Some followed the formula pretty closely, others used that same general foundation to build something more specific around it. Studios were creating their own engines, testing larger levels, and finding new ways for people to interact with first-person worlds. The genre was still young enough that developers were figuring out what these games could become.
Ceramic vase. What was that?
Sounds like you just opened something.
Tony Crowther was one of the people working inside that period. Crowther had already been making games for years by the time Realms of the Haunting entered development. His work stretched across the Commodore 64, Amiga, Atari ST, PC, and the Amiga CD32, and he built a reputation for making complicated games with a lot happening beneath the surface. One of his earlier projects was Captive, a first-person dungeon crawler released in 1990. Captive was heavily influenced by Dungeon Master, which helped establish the real-time dungeon crawler formula a few years earlier. These games put the player inside these large maze-like environments where progress depended on exploration, inventory management, combat, and understanding how different areas connected. Crowther had talked about it like there was a pretty direct line running through everything he made. You could trace it from the games he played to the ones he built and see how each one pushed towards the next. Dungeon Master led him towards Captive. Then Doom pushed him towards the technology that would eventually become Realms of the Haunting. That earlier dungeon crawler experience becomes really important because Crowther was entering the first-person shooter era with years of experience in exploration and large interconnected environments. After finishing Liberation Captive 2 for the Amiga CD32, Crowther began working with programmer Ross Goodley on a new first-person engine. They were experimenting with real-time 3D and the kinds of environments that were starting to show up in games like Doom. Crowther said they even got bits of Doom's levels running inside their own engine at one point, just to see if it would work. He openly described the project as a Doom clone. At that stage, the engine was the project. Adam Randall, the haunted house, the religious mythology, and the larger conflict between different realms hadn't even started to take shape yet. Crowther and Goodley had a working piece of technology and needed a company to support the game they wanted to build around it. Crowther took the engine to Gremlin Graphics. He already knew the Gremlin founder, Ian Stewart, from earlier work in the British computer industry. So there was already an existing relationship there when he came back looking for another project. Crowther offered Gremlin two general directions for the engine. One was fantasy, and the other was horror. And Gremlin chose horror.
The hands are set, the door to thee is open wide. Who holds the key? Shield the heart from purging fire. Regard the knight, whose mien is higher.
The original agreement covered 2 years of development. Crowther and Goodley handled the program and tech side, while Gremlin brought in artists, writers, and designers to turn the engine into an actual game. Paul Green came in to build out the world around it. He had joined Gremlin as an artist and designer, and like a lot of people there, he was regularly encouraged to pitch and develop his own ideas. Crowther provided the original horror concept. From there, Green shaped everything else. The setting, characters, mythology, and the broader story that held it all together. Crowther figured out how the world would actually work as a place you move through, while Green took care of what that world actually was. The story, the rules, and why anything in it existed in the first place. That split is where the original horror idea started to grow into something a lot bigger. What began as this technical experiment slowly turned into a full narrative game with its own identity.
It's a ceramic flask, warm to the touch. There's some sort of hot liquid inside. No obvious smell or anything.
I'm sure it'll come in useful for something.
From there, Gremlin started shaping what the experience should actually feel like. Crowther believed that two of the biggest genres on PC could share the same experience. First-person shooters were really taking off after Doom, while point-and-click adventure games were still a big part of PC gaming at the time. LucasArts and Sierra had spent years building adventure games around exploration and problem-solving, where progress came from really paying attention and examining the environment, collecting items, and working out how different locations and clues connected over time. Crowther wanted to mix that style of interaction into a first-person action game. The player could move through the world with a weapon, then switch to a cursor to interact with objects in the environment. A desk might have ammo, a letter, a key, or an item needed to solve a puzzle somewhere else in the house. That became the basic design behind Realms of the Haunting. Gremlin eventually called it a 3D atmospheric action adventure, which was basically the simplest way they could describe a game that kept shifting between a bunch of different genres. The engine they created was flexible enough to support that approach. Gremlin called Crowther's work the true 3D engine. It sat in that same general 2.5D space as Doom, with sprite-based enemies and environments built around a lot of the same visual limitations. It also had enough height variation, lighting, environmental detail, and object interaction that Gremlin could start building something that felt closer to an adventure game inside a first-person world. The same engine ended up being used in another Gremlin project called Normality. Normality used the first-person perspective for a comedy adventure game built around exploration and point-and-click puzzles. It actually came out before Realms of the Haunting, even though Crowther said they'd already started work on the engine as part of the Realms project. Development kept going after Normality wrapped up, which meant Realms of the Haunting ended up running on a more refined version of the engine. The company saw it as a way to make adventure game worlds feel more immediate, instead of jumping between fixed screens like in older point-and-click games where clicking an arrow would snap you to a completely new static room. The player could just walk around the environment and look at everything up close. That design was coming in right as PC gaming was going through another big shift. At the time, most PC games were still coming out on floppy disks, but CD-ROM drives are starting to become a lot more common, and developers suddenly had a lot more storage to work with. A game on floppy disks had to work with pretty tight limits. CD-ROMs changed that by giving developers space for full voice acting, recorded music, detailed artwork, pre-rendered backgrounds, and these long cutscenes. Adventure games became one of the main places where developers tested those ideas. Games like Myst and The Seventh Guest showed how much attention CD-ROM games could get by leaning into detailed visuals, sound, and pre-rendered cutscenes to make the world feel more real and immersive. Other games started using real actors. Under a Killing Moon, Phantasmagoria, The Beast Within, and Ripper all used live-action footage as a major part of their presentation. For a while, full-motion video was one of the industry's biggest attempts to make games feel more like movies. Developers could film full performances and drop real actors into stories that game engines just couldn't really show properly at the time. People started calling these games interactive movies, especially when they had enough footage to fill multiple CDs. Gremlin decided that Realms of the Haunting would use FMV to carry its characters and story. Paul Green described the live-action scenes as important to both the atmosphere and the plot. The game had a big cast, these long conversations, and a mythology that would eventually involve several realms, supernatural factions, and an approaching apocalypse.
Hey, that's us. But I didn't see any cameras.
Do you think someone knew we were coming?
The first-person engine could handle the exploration, combat, and interacting with the environment, while the film scenes gave the characters real performances and let bigger stories play out through real conversations. Brightlight Studios handled the actual filming, prosthetics, makeup, props, and costumes. Alan Coltman directed the actors, and most of the scenes were shot in front of blue screens. Then they took the footage back to Gremlin where the team added in the backgrounds, effects, and everything else needed to build the final scenes. The end result mixed the real actors with the game environments, costumes, makeup, special effects, which is really what gave the cutscenes that special look. Everything comes together in a way that feels a bit theatrical, but in a way that immediately places the game right in that mid-90s CD-ROM era. Gremlin's marketing talked about how big the live-action shoot was. There was a lot of FMV in this game for the time, and that ended up making it 4 CDs long. All that space was being used for everything needed to tell this crazy story, and that story was growing alongside the rest of the project. Paul Green had been into tabletop role-playing games since he was a kid, especially Call of Cthulhu and RuneQuest, and he said that's where he learned how to build fictional worlds. A tabletop setting needs enough history and structure for people to believe it exists beyond the immediate story. There's factions, locations, important objects, and rules explaining how the world operates. Each part has to connect well enough for the larger setting to hold together.
We're constantly trying to drop these feathers at Adam's feet and Rebecca's feet, and we had like a special design feather dropping stick, which basically was a pole with 2 holes in it, and we used to rotate it and shake it and the feathers would drop out.
Green brought that same way of thinking into Realms of the Haunting. The mythology itself grew from religious and apocalyptic writing. Green looked into both mainstream and more obscure religious beliefs, some of those being Hebrew texts about heaven, earth, hell, angels, and demons. He also pulled ideas from books like The Holy Blood and The Holy Grail, while building out the game's backstory. Those sources helped shape a lot of the game, like the Sills and supernatural factions, the different realms, and just the larger struggle around the main character. Green also mentions a couple of films that helped shape the game's atmosphere. The biggest influence was Michael Mann's The Keep. It's about an ancient evil slowly waking up inside this isolated place, and Green really liked that slow-building sense of dread that never really lets up. You can feel a bit of that same mood in the early parts of the game. John Carpenter's The Thing was another big influence, especially the opening scene and how it sets up that feeling of isolation and paranoia. By this point, Crowther's original horror pitch had expanded into one of Gremlin's biggest projects. The engine had to support combat, exploration, inventory systems, environmental interaction, and increasingly complicated levels. Green was building a story around religious history, several supernatural realms, and a large cast of characters. Brightlight Studios was filming the live-action cutscenes, and Gremlin was combining those performances with digital scenery, effects, and sound and music. The original agreement had been planned around 2 years of development. Crowther had said the project ended up stretching over 3 years, and even forced him to renegotiate his contract with Gremlin. He also said he remembers Realms of the Haunting as the game that gave him the most headaches in his entire career. The FMV production also grew beyond what the final game could hold. Green later said that about an hour of footage ended up being cut, mostly because of the time, cost, memory limits, and the sheer expense of adding another disc. The ending also changed pretty late in development. Even with 4 CDs holding the final game, they still had to leave some of the original material behind. Green said the art and programming teams already had a good sense of the scale because they were working on it every day. The rest of Gremlin only really saw how big it was once the FMV scenes were put together, and everything finally clicked into one complete game. The project had started during the rush that followed Doom. Then Quake came out in '96 with fully polygonal environments and characters moving through true 3D worlds. First-person games had entered another technical stage while Gremlin was finishing a project that had already spent years in development. That timing put Realms of the Haunting between several different periods of PC gaming. Its first-person foundation came from the years following Doom. The exploration and inventory systems came from point-and-click adventure games. CD-ROM storage gave the team room for a much larger production. FMV allowed the story to unfold through live actors. The mythology came from tabletop world-building, religious research, and films built around supernatural dread. Gremlin gathered all of those ideas into one project, while each of them was still developing.
This cup's certainly run over. To mention his veins. His only hope really is you. And there you are with your hands tied behind your back.
So all of that context behind Realms of the Haunting, it really explains how shooting and point-and-click adventure design ended up in the same project. Now let's get into the actual game, because the surprising part is how naturally all of those ideas work together. There was never a moment where it felt like my brain had to stop processing one game and begin processing another. You could be walking through a hallway looking for something useful, and an enemy would appear out of nowhere. The gun comes up, the fight happens, and then you go right back to searching the room. That transition stays smooth because most of the game is built around the same basic form of interaction. The mouse moves your cursor when you're looking around the environment. You can also aim at an enemy when it's time to shoot. Both combat and exploration just have you pointing at things on the screen and interacting with them. That becomes the foundation for almost everything you do.
Rakria lies to the north, traveler.
You move through the house, stop when something catches your attention, and bring up the cursor to look around. Furniture can be checked out, doors can be tested, bodies might have something useful, papers can be picked up and read. Small, random objects in a room might later connect to a puzzle somewhere else. The game gives you a ton of freedom to decide on your own what's worth checking out. Some objects are super important the moment you click on them, while others are just there to give Adam something to react to. And some items feel useless when you first pick them up, only to become important later when the game finally gives you the other half of the puzzle. Adam's comments make the whole thing more engaging than just using the inventory alone. Whenever you pick something up, you can open the inventory, look at the model, and hear what he has to say about it. Sometimes the description gives you practical information, other comments tell you more about the object, the house, or the way Adam's reacting to everything happening around him. Even just collecting stuff feels good because there's always that little moment of discovery that comes with it. You find an object, it goes into Adam's hand, the game highlights it in the inventory, and you can flip it around, take a look at it, and figure out if it matters right now or later on. That extra step makes regular pickups feel a bit more meaningful. You have to open a page and actually read it. A weird object can be looked at from different angles, and a key might just have a simple description that gives you enough to start figuring out where it goes.
Him again. Dressed as
Oh god.
a temple.
Gets around a bit.
Skeletons! The sound design helps those slower moments not feel so empty. You might be standing in a quiet room looking through furniture or reading a document, and suddenly you hear screaming or laughing or kids crying. Other noises drift through the house too while you explore. Sometimes it feels like they're mocking you. The game doesn't even need a visible enemy to keep the space feeling alive.
Pieces are wired together.
To stop it collapsing, I expect.
Cartridges for a shotgun.
Those sounds remind you that something's still happening around Adam while your attention is buried in an inventory screen or focused on a clue. They make it feel like the house keeps going even when you're not looking at it, like it exists beyond whatever room you're standing in. Once Rebecca joins the journey, the game gets another voice in the mix. She doesn't show up as a character model following you around the hallways, but her presence still makes the journey feel a lot less lonely. She can comment on objects, add historical or supernatural context, and react to parts of the world that Adam might not fully understand.
Maybe I can help.
Maybe you could help me? Lady, I just drove for 2 hours in a cab to get to a house in the middle of nowhere. I don't know why I'm here. I'm cold. I'm wet. People are trying to kill me.
Her guidance in this, it never really felt like a straight-up solution to the puzzles whenever I played through it. What she gives you instead is just perspective.
Time and reality.
Devices with the power to take us to the tower.
2 masks.
Adam can describe what he sees, and Rebecca can sometimes read a bigger meaning into it. That helps tie the stuff you pick up to the story as it unfolds, and gives the game a sense of companionship without needing a traditional follower system. Then an enemy walks into the room and everything suddenly speeds up. Combat comes in short bursts throughout the exploration. You might hear something before you see it, or turn around and have an enemy right in your face. Some of the strongest jump scares in the game come from turning around to an enemy right there already hitting you. Once that threat shows up, your mouse stays right at the center of the action. Most 2.5D shooters from this era, they keep the weapon pointed straight ahead, so you usually aim by rotating your whole character until the enemy lines up in the center of the screen. This game gives us a lot more control over the weapon itself. The cursor can move across the screen, and Adam physically shifts the gun towards the point we're aiming at. You can fire towards the left or the right side of the view without turning his entire body into position first. It's a small detail when you compare it to modern games, but it really stands up for a game like this. You can see Adam moving the weapon as the cursor moves across the screen. The shooting animations have enough motion to make the guns feel satisfying to use. And the reloads get more attention than you usually see in a shooter built with this kind of engine. The combat as a whole, though, feels pretty much what you'd expect from a 2.5D game from this era. Enemies move straight towards you, so things can get crowded, and the weapons don't always feel super impactful. But some of the death animations help make up for that, though. A few enemies have exaggerated reactions that adds a bit more personality to the fight. At the start, you're mostly working with normal guns and a sword. The pistol becomes a pretty reliable option since you keep finding ammo for it, and the shotgun does as well. The game gives you enough shells in the first half that you can use it without stressing over every shot. And honestly, as far as the animations go, I think they're the most satisfying. The reload for the pistol and the pump for the shotgun, it just looks really good. As things get more supernatural, the weapons start changing too. Adam gets access to magical weapons that run on rechargeable energy. You can fire them before they're fully recharged, but letting them charge all the way gives you a stronger attack. That makes combat feel a bit more fluid and different. You can fire the staff, switch to the magical dagger, move to the sword, and then pull out the blunderbuss while your earlier weapons recharge. A single fight can have you rotating through several weapons and coming back to each one as it's built its energy back up. And the keybind system makes the weapon order in your inventory important. Weapons go into inventory slots, and those slots decide how fast you can pull them out. And there are more weapons than keybinds, so you'll eventually have to pick which ones are worth having ready quickly. That ends up being your main inventory choice for combat. There is no carry capacity. The game lets you grab the items you find without constantly leaving things behind. Your decisions come from organizing the weapons you expect to use and placing them where you can reach them during a fight. The rechargeable weapons also change how the ammo pressure works. In the first half of the game, pistol and shotgun ammo shows up often enough that you rarely feel like you're in trouble. You can search around, keep your guns loaded, and get through most fights without ever feeling close to empty. That generosity starts pulling back later. Shotgun ammo did get pretty low at one point in my playthrough, but I never ended up with a weapon that was totally unusable. The magic weapons are nice because they're always there for you, as long as you give the energy a bit of time to recharge. Health works the same way. The first half gives you a lot of healing items. You can make mistakes, take damage in fights, and usually still find enough health nearby to recover. Later on, healing gets a bit more scarce, especially once traps and puzzle rooms start showing up and making things a lot more dangerous. That shifts where the pressure's coming from. A careless fight can cost you health. The same goes for stepping into the wrong spot, triggering a mechanism, or not quite understanding what a puzzle room expects from you. By the last quarter, a lot of the biggest threats come from the environment itself. You can even lose health just by trying to figure out a room, which ties the resource system right into the puzzle side of the game. Your inventory is where everything comes together. Your weapons and ammo sit right next to healing items. Keys, documents, and puzzle items are carried alongside supernatural artifacts that play a much bigger role in the story. The inventory works fine, but the window feels a bit small for all the info crammed in there. Items are split across multiple pages, so you might have to click through the collection until you land on the right one. The game helps by dropping every new pickup straight into Adam's hand and highlighting it, so the most recent item is always easy to spot. That really comes in handy when you've picked up a bunch of similar looking items or grabbed something during a longer stretch of exploring. The inspection window has the same cramped feeling. Objects are shown clearly enough, but documents and maps often need more space than you get. Reading a long page in that small window takes a bit of patience. And maps can be tricky to study when you're trying to keep an entire route in your head. The maps, though, are still one of the most interesting parts of the inventory to me. Some areas in the game are literally mazes. Some are small enough that you can figure them out just by paying attention to nearby landmarks, but others are a lot bigger, and they might be hiding important items somewhere inside. The map shows the layout of the area, but there is no "you are here" mark on the map. You just look at the drawing, compare it with the walls and paths around you, and figure out where you're standing. Then we plan a small part of the route. You might decide to head in, take the first left, then another left, go straight, turn right. Once you get there, you can stop and check the map again before planning your next move. It really works like how you would actually use a physical map. The game gives you the information and expects you to figure out where you are from it. That can get tricky in bigger areas, especially when a lot of hallways start looking the same. But it also makes navigation feel like something you're actively doing. The map becomes something you have to figure out, it never really just gives you the answer. Keys work through that same kind of memory. When you run into a locked door, Adam usually just tells you it's locked. The game doesn't add a map marker or leave a note telling you which key to come back with. Later, you might find an item labeled Silver Key. That just tells you what Adam picked up. It doesn't point to any specific door. So you have to remember where the locked doors were, return to those areas, and begin testing the key until you find the correct one. That turns a simple progression item into a quick little test of your spatial memory. The seals have a different role. Most of them get removed naturally as the story moves forward, so their bigger purpose is tied more to the plot and mythology. On the gameplay side, they function more like a progress gate, preventing you from accessing other parts of the house until you're ready. The regular puzzle items get you more directly involved. A collected object might fit into a mechanism, complete part of a symbol, or connect to information found in a document. Sometimes the solution becomes a bit more clear once you take a closer look at the item and figure out where it's meant to go.
Whoa, that seems to have done something.
Straw?
Other puzzles require you to remember something from an earlier room or notice that two details belong to the same problem. The first half of the game sometimes leans on logic that feels a bit confusing, but the overall progression for the puzzles still stayed pretty steady while I played through it. There weren't many moments where I just felt like I was completely stuck. The difficulty ramps up a lot towards the end, especially when the puzzle chains and maze-like areas start taking more time to work through. What really matters is the design language the game's teaching you. You examine the environment, you collect anything that seems important, you study the object, then you look for the place, document, or mechanism that gives it context. Gremlin understood that this created a different kind of challenge from the shooting. The game lets you tweak the action and adventure difficulty separately. The combat settings control how tough enemies are, while the adventure setting changes how much help you get when figuring out and using items in your inventory. On the easier adventure setting, the game just auto-picks the right item for you. On higher settings, you're in charge of making the call yourself. That option says a lot about how Gremlin viewed the design. Combat asks you to react, aim, move, and manage damage. The adventure side asks you to observe, remember, connect information, and understand what the collected objects are meant to accomplish. The player can adjust those types of pressures independently because the game recognizes them as separate skills working inside the same journey. Most of the interface does a pretty good job holding those systems together once you figure out what it's expecting. The cramped inventory, document viewer, and map window can feel a bit clunky at times. Flipping through pages takes a little extra time, and smaller items might require a closer look around the environment to track down. The light platforming bits have definitely aged more noticeably. Adam moves with the speed you'd expect from a Doom-era first-person game. That movement works well when you're crossing rooms or creating distance in combat, but it gets harder to control when the game asks for a timed jump or a precise landing. You move fast towards the edge, and in first person it's hard to judge the landing spot. These parts don't really define the whole experience, but they can break the flow when a jump takes a few tries. Outside of that, I think the game has held up really well. Going into it with an understanding of the era and the kind of experience Gremlin built makes the controls pretty easy to get used to. The cursor still comes in handy, and the shooting feels natural within the interface, and the inventory makes sense once you get used to flipping through its pages. The puzzles also give the items you pick up a clear purpose. I think the game's identity really comes from how you're constantly switching between fighting, searching, collecting, and just figuring things out.
Well, looking for this?
Now let's get into the story. By the time Realms of the Haunting begins explaining what's actually happening, the story's already placed several mysteries in front of you. Adam Randall's father, Charles, has died under suspicious circumstances in Cornwall. Charles was a preacher at St. Michael's Church, but Adam had grown up mostly in Canada with his mother, after his parents split up. Aside from a brief visit a few years earlier, Adam hadn't really seen much of his father before he died. That distance leaves Adam with a lot of questions and not much idea of what Charles had actually been caught up in towards the end of his life. And then the dreams begin. Some of them show Adam a house he barely remembers. Others are violent. There's strange supernatural figures, flashes of chaos. And a young woman he's never actually met. Then a priest who calls himself Camber shows up and tells Adam that Charles has been writing to him. Camber says the letters hinted that something was seriously wrong with a house Charles had been investigating. Before he died, Charles also sent Camber a package meant for Adam. Inside are 6 shattered pieces of carved stone. Camber leaves after dropping off the package, and Adam quickly finds out there's no record of any priest by that name. The letters Camber supposedly received are gone too. The package, though, is definitely real, and the dreams keep getting worse. The house that keeps showing up in them gives Adam a place to start digging. The opening FMV lays all of this out pretty plainly. Adam sits in front of the camera and talks through his past, the dreams, Camber's visit, and what's inside the box. It immediately grounds the story in a real person before things start getting weird. That's basically what the FMV keeps doing throughout the game. The larger mythology is delivered through documents, journals, item descriptions, and conversations stored inside the inventory. The cutscenes give those ideas characters that you can recognize and remember. Adam eventually tracks down the house and walks inside alone. The front doors close behind him, and the personal mystery surrounding his father begins turning into something a lot bigger. Several parts of the house are inaccessible when Adam arrives. Doors are locked, supernatural wards block entire wings, and the building contains passages that seem to extend far below the rooms above them. In the study, Adam finally sees the spirit of his father. Charles tells him that something is terribly wrong. His soul is trapped, and he believes Adam may be able to free him. He also tells Adam to find someone named Alf. Charles warns that a major conflict is approaching between 2 opposing figures, but he can't stay long enough to give Adam a complete explanation. His spirit disappears, and a hidden route opens behind the bookcase. Adam follows it into the mausoleum beneath the house. This is where Adam receives the first physical sign that he has a specific role inside whatever's happening. He enters a chamber containing a throne and is branded on both of his palms. The markings identify him as the Marked One, a figure whose arrival has already been predicted within the game's mythology. Several people had been placed into the same branding device before Adam. Their skeletons are outside the mausoleum, and the process appears to have killed every one of them. Adam survives it, though. The game never gives a complete mechanical explanation of why the branding accepts him. His place in the prophecy and his identity as the Marked One appear to be the reason, and the brand allows him to touch an object called the Shrive without being destroyed by its power. The Shrive is one of the most important objects in the entire story. When Adam first gets it, he has no real idea what he's holding. It looks like an unusual piece of metal surrounded by energy, and the markings on his hands start to react to it. Its full purpose takes a lot longer to understand. Adam also meets Claude Florentine shortly after that. Florentine demands the Shrive, speaking as though Adam has entered a conflict far beyond his understanding, and leaves demons behind to kill him. This is the same man who visited Adam under the name Camber. The package, the missing priest, and the path into the house were all connected to him. Adam then runs into the spirit of Alf, the person his father told him to find. Alf was a knight who died centuries earlier, and pieces of his armor remain scattered through the house and the realms connected to it. He appears whenever Adam discovers something tied to his history, offering small pieces of guidance without explaining the complete situation. By the time Adam returns to the study, Rebecca Travisard is waiting for him. Rebecca introduces herself as a psychic researcher. She has knowledge of the supernatural, recognizes some of the objects Adam's carrying, and understands that the house is connected to the forces operating outside the normal world. She also happens to be the woman Adam had been seeing in his dreams. From this point forward, Rebecca becomes his companion. Her presence also gives Adam someone to speak with. Without her, most of the story would have been delivered through documents or Adam talking to himself. Rebecca allows the game to work through ideas and conversation, especially once the mythology begins introducing several realm supernatural factions and characters who have been manipulating events for centuries. Before going further into the journey, it helps to understand what all these people are fighting over. At the center of the game's universe is the Soul Stone. The Soul Stone receives the thoughts of humanity and gives form to their strongest extremes. Thoughts associated with goodness can produce beings understood as angels. Extreme evil can create demons and other supernatural entities. The game still treats God and Satan as real powers within the universe, though neither appear in a normal physical form. God represents the highest concentration of good, while Satan, or the other as some characters call it, represent the combined forces of evil. The Soul Stone exists between those forces and maintains the balance surrounding them. That balance is built into the structure of the universe. Good and evil continue to exist beside one another, and the Soul Stone acts as a safeguard whenever one side begins pushing too far. This is where Hawk and Gaul enter the mythology. Gaul was created as a vessel capable of receiving the power of the other. If the final protection surrounding the Soul Stone collapsed, the complete force of evil can enter Gaul and take physical form. The Soul Stone also produced Hawk as Gaul's opposite. Hawk is the intended vessel for the power of light, created to preserve the balance and confront Gaul when the time comes. These two figures are sometimes called the Watchers. They represent the opposing extremes created through the Soul Stone, and their eventual confrontation is supposed to happen according to the natural timing of the universe. He removed a sword called Eternity from the Soul Stone centuries before Adam entered the house. That act damaged the balance and started a chain of corruption spreading through the connected realms. Florentine also spent hundreds of years breaking the seals that protect the Soul Stone. There are 7 of them in total. By the beginning of the game, 6 have already been destroyed. The broken pieces inside the package delivered to Adam came from those seals. Florentine began this work in 1330. He had been connected to the Knights Templar before establishing the Temple of the Morning Star, an order devoted to bringing the power of darkness into the world. His journals describe ceremonies carried out across several centuries. Fires, deaths, and supernatural disasters followed the breaking of the seals, while Florentine continued surviving long beyond a normal human lifespan. During the first ceremony, he entered the Chamber of the Soul Stone and removed Eternity. The sword then disappeared from his control and eventually found its way into another realm. Florentine continued breaking the remaining seals while searching for a way to recover it. His goal is to destroy the 7th seal and allow the other to manifest inside Gaul. The prophecy surrounding the final seal creates a problem for him. Adam has to decide its fate. Florentine can guide him, frighten him, lie to him, and place every necessary object along his path. The final decision still belongs to the Marked One. That's why Florentine sends Adam the shattered pieces. He needs Adam curious enough to enter the house, emotionally invested enough to keep searching for his father, and powerful enough to reach the Chamber of the Soul Stone. What initially looks like Adam following a mystery is really Florentine moving him towards a choice. The Shrive is the other part of that choice. It originally formed the Pommel of Eternity. Together, the sword and the shrive create the tool needed to interact with the Soulstone and restore the balance Florentine disturbed. The shrive can force the world's evil back into a lesser form and contain it for another 1,000 years. Adam's brands on his palms allow him to carry it, while Belial had to create a pair of gloves from human skin to touch it safely. That detail tells you a lot about Belial before his role is fully explained. Belial appears as a doctor. He wears a clean laboratory coat, glasses, and gloves while speaking with the calm distance of someone carrying out an experiment. The branding chamber beneath the house is connected to him. The people who died there was used in his attempt to create protection against the shrive. When Adam and Rebecca meet him, Belial treats them with the same clinical interest. His performance never needs shouting or exaggerated movement to make him threatening. He speaks quietly, studies them, and seems genuinely curious about what their bodies can survive. Hawk later describes Belial as a manifestation created through Florentine's evil thoughts. Florentine wanted an ally capable of helping him with the seals, and the Soulstone gave that part of him a physical form. Their relationship eventually collapsed. By the time Adam reaches the house, Florentine and Belial are working towards their own goals and competing for the attention of the same dark power. Belial wants the shrive and repeatedly interferes with Adam's progress, though his actions also end up pushing Adam towards the final confrontation. The game contains another version of Belial's origin inside the St. Michael Church, where a stained glass image presents him as a demon cast down by Alf. Those explanations never really line up perfectly, though. The clearest information comes from Hawk, who connects Belial directly to Florentine and the Soulstone. The church imagery also gives him another spot in the game's religious symbolism, and the exact relationship between those versions is still kind of unclear. Rebecca has her own hidden connections to Florentine also. Documents found later in the game reveal that she once served as a priestess inside the Temple of the Morning Star. She helped Florentine with his research and traveled in search of books and artifacts he could use. Letters refer to her through the initials RJ, which keeps Adam from recognizing the connection when he first reads them. Florentine's writings also describe dreams involving Rebecca and a stranger standing together inside the chamber of the Soulstone. The stranger was Adam. The exact moment when Rebecca turned against Florentine is never fully explained. Her letters suggest that she returned after sensing that one of the ceremonies had gone wrong, and by the time she meets Adam, she is helping him prevent the final seal from being destroyed. Her past really gives her role more weight. Rebecca understands the Order because she once took part in it. She knows more about Florentine and the mythology than she initially admits, and helping Adam gives her a chance to confront something she helped build. The game reveals most of this history gradually. Florentine's journals are divided across different locations. Newspaper clippings record fires and deaths connected to the ceremonies. Letters expose Rebecca's earlier role, while objects connected to Alf open more information about the knights who tried to protect the Soulstone.
Kill you, son of a bitch! Adam, no! Get off me!
The story builds up piece by piece, with each format handling a different part of it. Adam's journey into the bigger realm starts with a being called the Gnarl. He finds a crystal in the house and uses it to reach him. The Gnarl basically tests Adam with a short conversation, then gives him 2 masks. Those masks are what let him enter the tower. The tower sits between worlds and links the different realms through a network of gates. When Adam enters it for the first time, he meets Raphael, a guide who warns him about the dangers moving through that space. One of those dangers is the Ire, a mass of spirits said to consume travelers who become lost inside the tower. Another is the Dodger, a creature that's escaped into the network of gates and keeps trying to break through into the house. Florentine had suppressed several of those gates in an attempt to contain it. That gives the teleportation a real place inside the story. Adam's moving through a dimension built between realities, using the masks to enter gates that connect the house with locations far beyond Earth. The portals also explain how one building can contain access to a spirit realm, a divine garden, the upper levels of hell, and other locations that would have no normal physical connection to one another. While exploring the lower parts of the house, Adam hears the voice of Hawk. Hawk is trapped inside a supernatural prison and can't tell Adam exactly how to release him. The key is located in Rakia. Reaching Rakia requires Alf's dagger and a working path through the tower. The trip also pushes Adam deeper into Florentine's history. His cottage and observatory are hidden below the estate. Journals found there describe the seal-breaking ceremonies, his attempts to track eternity, and the dreams that told him Adam and Rebecca would eventually reach the Soulstone. Adam also begins seeing Gaul. Gaul appears briefly through visions and distant encounters. He remains difficult to understand because the game saves his real purpose for Hawk's explanation. Until then, he feels like another person moving through the same plan. always slightly ahead of Adam and clearly connected to Florentine. Rakia is ruled by Raziel, the jailer. Raziel holds authority over imprisonment and release inside the realm. He presents himself as neutral, carrying out the responsibilities of his position without aligning himself with either side of the larger conflict. Hawk is his prisoner. The conditions surrounding that imprisonment prevent Raziel from simply telling Adam where Hawk is being held, or handing over the means to free him. He can allow Adam to undergo a series of trials, though. Completing them earns the Key of Tears. Rakia becomes the first major example of how the game's different realms are tied directly to Adam's purpose. He travels there because Hawk holds information he needs. The trials provide the only way to obtain the key, and freeing Hawk moves the entire story from scattered clues into a clearer explanation of what Florentine's done. The realm also shows signs of corruption. Rebecca notices that something feels wrong with it, suggesting that the damage caused by Eternity's removal has begun spreading beyond the Soulstone itself. Once Adam returns with the Key of Tears, he opens Hawk's prison beneath the house. Hawk becomes the closest thing the game has to a direct source of answers. Adam can ask him about the Soulstone, the seals, Florentine, Belial, Gaul, Alf, the realms, and the prophecy. The information available depends on what Adam has already discovered. Finding more journals and documents creates more subjects he can raise during the conversation. Hawk explains that humanity's thoughts feed into the Soulstone. He tells Adam that Gaul is awaiting to receive the other, while Hawk exists as the vessel of light. He explains Florentine's attempt to force the confrontation early and confirms that the final seal can either preserve the balance or allow evil to take physical form. He also makes Adam's role a bit clearer. Adam's arrival has been expected. The brands, the shrive, and the path towards the chamber are all connected to a choice that only he can make. Hawk can explain the structure around that decision, but he can't make it for him. That limitation continues through the final confrontation. Multiple characters know what Adam's moving towards, though the prophecy prevents them from simply taking control of the outcome. Freeing Hawk also opens the route to Charles Randall's vicarage and St. Michael's Church. The return to his father's home brings the personal side of the story back into focus. Charles had been investigating the supernatural activity surrounding the house and the seals before his death. Florentine appears to have killed him and trapped his spirit because Adam's connection to his father made him useful. Camber's visit gave Adam the physical evidence, the dreams gave him the location, and Charles' trapped soul gave him a reason to keep moving once the escape became possible. Florentine built the entire journey around Adam's need to understand what happened to his father. Inside the vicarage and church, Belial has placed supernatural wards across the doors. Adam needs Belial's torch to reveal them, and a wand to remove them. Florentine's journals continue filling in the history, and the church contains more connections between Alf, Belial, and the forces surrounding the Soulstone. Adam eventually finds Alf's helmet there. That helmet gives him access to Arqua, the realm of the divine. Arqua appears connected to the Garden of Paradise. The realm contains the Tree of Understanding, associated with humanity gaining knowledge and the power to choose. That idea fits Adam's role in the story. Every major force understands that he will eventually reach the Soulstone. The result depends on what he chooses once he gets there. Arqua removes most of Adam's ordinary possessions when he enters. Weapons, ammunition, and healing items are all left behind because the realm doesn't allow objects that reflect the elements in the same way as the items carried from Earth. Adam then works through a series of elemental runes and rituals. Each section provides an object or action connected to fire, water, earth, or air. Those pieces are eventually brought together in one larger ritual that reveals eternity. Adam enters this realm to recover Alf's sword. Eternity was once part of the Soulstone. Florentine removed it during the first seal-breaking ceremony, and the sword eventually escapes his control. Returning it is necessary to restore the power that was taken away. Alf's connection to the sword also explains why his spirit keeps appearing through Adam's journey. He was one of the knights who fought to protect the Soulstone and the objects surrounding it. His armor marks Adam's progress through the story, while his dagger and helmet give access to realms holding the Key of Tears and Eternity. The sword remains the most important piece. When Adam holds Eternity and the Shrive together, he senses that the sword, the brand on his hands, and the Shrive are expressions of the same force. The Shrive belongs in the pommel. Reuniting them restores Eternity and gives Adam what he needs for the Chamber of the Soulstone. Belial captures Adam while he's returning from Arqua. Adam wakes up inside a cell without any of his items, and Eternity and the Shrive have been taken. Rebecca ends up freeing him, helping him escape and recover the objects. This is one of the points where Belial's intentions become a bit hard to read. He wants the Shrive and clearly has his own interest in the final outcome. His interference still leaves Adam alive and able to reclaim everything required to continue. That may come from Belial underestimating Rebecca, his rivalry with Florentine, or his own understanding of the prophecy. The game leaves a bit of rumor on that exact plan. Once Adam has recovered Eternity in the Shrive, the next destination is Sheol. Sheol is described as the uppermost layer of Hell. The Chamber of the Soulstone lies somewhere inside it, with deeper layers extending below towards the pit. Adam reaches the entrance through a graveyard maze and meets Abaddon, the keeper of the key to the abyss. Abaddon explains that entry requires Adam to complete 3 trials. Each one takes place inside a different world and tests him through another series of puzzles, enemies, and symbolic areas. One of the most important is the Halls of the Doppelgangers, where Adam faces versions of himself. The trials move the journey into increasingly abstract territory. By that point, the grounded rooms of the original house are far behind him. The spaces are built around judgment, identity, temptation, and the role Adam's expected to fulfill. Completing the test grants the gifts to enter Sheol and continue towards the Soul Stone. The final gathering brings the main pieces of the story into one place. Florentine's waiting inside the chamber of the Soul Stone. Gaul is there as the vessel for the other. Hawk arrives as his opposing force. Alf returns through his connection to eternity. Rebecca stands beside Adam, exactly as Florentine had seen in his dreams. And Florentine also carries the seventh seal around his neck. The 6 shattered pieces sent to Adam had already done their job. They drew him into the house and led him through every step needed to reach this chamber. Florentine now needs Adam to complete the plan. The final sequence gives you several dialogue and action choices. Florentine tries to provoke Adam into fighting him. He wants Adam to act before understanding how the prophecy works. The successful path requires patience. When Adam is asked whether he trusts time, he has to accept that the larger balance is already moving around him. He refuses to attack Florentine and places eternity into the Soul Stone. The Shrive returns to the sword, restoring the power that had been removed centuries earlier. Hawk kills Gaul before the other can permanently enter him. Alf kills Florentine, ending the life that had been stretched across more than 600 years of seal-breaking ceremonies. Adam's choice allows the balance to correct itself. The forces connected to the Soul Stone carry out the confrontation that Florentine spent centuries trying to control. Other choices can lead to failure. Florentine can trick Adam into breaking the seventh seal, allowing the other to manifest through Gaul. That ending gives Florentine the result he spent centuries building towards. The successful ending comes from Adam recognizing that Florentine's pressure is part of the trap. He has spent the entire game being pushed from one objective to the next. At the Soul Stone, he finally has to stop and decide whether to follow that pressure. The answer is to return eternity and allow the balance to work. Once Florentine is dead, the systems holding the house together begin collapsing. The wards suppressing the tower gates fail. Demons flood the building, and the Dodger finally escapes into the house. Adam is returned to the same place where the journey began, and has to fight his way back into the front entrance. The story has spent most of the game expanding outwards through the realms. The climax pulls everything back into the house and turns the original setting into one final escape. Paul Green said the team wanted the game to grow more intense the longer you played. He specifically pointed to Adam's escape from the Dodger as the intended peak of that rising pressure. Adam defeats the Dodger and reaches the front doors. The house is collapsing behind him. The Soul Stone's been restored, Florentine and Gaul are dead, and the immediate threat appears to be over. Then the game cuts to the epilogue. Adam is sitting inside what appears to be a mental institution. He's telling the doctor about everything that happened. The doctor listens to the story as though Adam has been describing a delusion. And the people from the journey begin appearing in ordinary institutional roles. The doctor resembles Belial. Then the nurse enters carrying medication and she looks like Rebecca. Adam stares at her, and the game ends without confirming what any of it means. One of your first thoughts could be that the entire journey took place inside Adam's mind. The house becomes a version of the institution. The locked doors, doctors, patients, religious images, and supernatural figures were all transformed by his delusion. Adam's belief that he was the marked one becomes part of a much larger break from reality. The familiar faces in the institution give that reading plenty of support. I think the other interpretation is the supernatural story is real. Belial is associated with deception and appears as a doctor during the journey. The other interpretation just takes the supernatural stuff at face value. Belial is tied to deception and shows up as a doctor during the journey. In this version, he survives the restoration of balance and basically traps Adam inside yet another constructed reality. The institution then becomes one last layer of the lie, designed to make Adam doubt everything he went through. Rebecca's appearance could be part of that same trick, or she might have actually found a way to reach him. Adam's reaction to her keeps it ambiguous enough that both readings still work. There is no confirmed right answer here. The developers changed the ending pretty late in production, and Paul Green had already started planning a sequel before the final scenes were even finished. That sequel was eventually dropped after the game underperformed, which is why the Asylum shot ends up being the final image we're left with. Green has talked about the late change and the abandoned sequel, but there's nothing in any interviews I could find that clearly says which interpretation he thinks we should set on. That lack of explanation can feel a bit sudden, especially after how much detail the game puts into the Soul Stone, the realms, the seals, and Florentine's backstory. But it also leaves the story with one final layer of uncertainty. Adam has spent the entire game trying to understand which characters are telling the truth. Florentine enters his life under a false name. Rebecca hid her history with the temple. Belial manipulates people through calm, controlled deception. Hawk understands the prophecy while remaining unable to explain every part of it. The ending puts Adam into another room with familiar faces and asks him to decide what reality he trusts. The game leaves us with the same problem. And the whole journey is carried by the FMV. The performances are super theatrical, the digital backgrounds immediately show their age, and several scenes run much longer than a normal cutscene would today. That length gives the mythology room. Characters can question one another, explain their place inside the conflict, and react to discoveries without reducing everything to a short mission briefing. Belial gets time to establish his clinical personality. Hawk can answer Adam's questions about the Soul Stone. Florentine can speak like someone who has spent centuries waiting for one specific moment. Rebecca can change from a mysterious psychic into someone personally connected to the history they're uncovering. The effects may look rough now, but the people inside them give the story an identity that would be really difficult to replace. The live-action scenes turn a complicated collection of names, journals, prophecies, and religious ideas into something you can attach to faces and performances. That becomes the real strength of the story. It begins with a son trying to understand his father's death. Then it opens into a conflict surrounding human thought and the balance of the universe, 7 broken seals, and a choice that's been waiting for Adam long before he knew the house existed. By the end, the games carried him through the realm of the spirit, the realm of the divine, the upper reaches of hell, and back to the same front door where his journey began. Then one final scene asks whether he ever left at all. The game turns one family mystery into a full religious apocalypse, and the FMV gives that impossible journey a human face.
A little late for your father now, wouldn't you say, Adam? His cup's certainly run over. To mention his veins.
Realms of the Haunting came out in the UK at the end of '96 and reached the United States in early '97. For a game that ended up this obscure, the original reviews were actually pretty strong. GameSpot gave it an 8.5 out of 10 and liked how the shooting, puzzles, and story all worked together. They also gave props to the FMV, along with the option to tweak action and adventure difficulty separately. PC Zone went even higher at 93% and called it an absorbing experience from the start to finish. It was also nominated for Computer Adventure Game of the Year at the first Interactive Achievement Awards. That kind of reaction pretty much lines up with what I felt during my own playthrough. Critics picked up on how the game's identity really came from everything working together. The combat made the house feel dangerous, the puzzles gave you a reason to actually explore every corner, and the FMV kept pushing the story outward, way beyond the starting location. They also pointed out some of the same rough edges we've already talked about. The controls take a bit to get used to, documents and maps are crammed into a tiny viewing window, and some of the puzzles' logic wasn't always easy to follow. Those issues were there from day one, but they didn't stop reviewers from seeing how ambitious the whole thing was. The real problem showed up after the reviews. As I had mentioned, Paul Green had already started working on a sequel before the final scenes of the game had been filmed. This game sold poorly, so those plans just kind of faded away. Green later said that was tough for the team, because the reviews were good, and the people who did play it really seemed to love it. It just never reached a big enough audience to justify continuing the series. There probably wasn't just one reason for that. The game came out at a time when first-person tech was moving really fast. By early '97, people were already seeing fully polygonal shooters and expecting the genre to keep pushing forward in that direction. Realms of the Haunting also needed a lot more explaining than most games you'd see sitting on a store shelf. Calling it a shooter left out all the inventory, puzzles, and exploration. Calling it an adventure game didn't really tell you how much combat there actually was. And then you've got horror, live-action cutscenes, dungeon crawling, and all that religious mythology on top of it, which made it even harder to sum up in a single sentence. That mix is exactly what made it stick out with the people who got into it. But it also meant Gremlin was basically trying to find an audience that was willing to jump between a bunch of different PC game styles all in one package. The timing just didn't really give the audience a chance to grow. Once the sales wrapped up, Realms of the Haunting was left as this odd 4-disc PC game with no franchise behind it to keep this name in circulation. That's a big reason it ended up feeling so forgotten over time. There were no sequels to continue the story or expand the mythology, no remake ever came along to introduce it to a new generation of players. For years, the only people who really remembered it were the ones who had randomly came across it back when it first released on PC. The game is a lot easier to find these days though. You can grab it on Steam or GOG, and everyone that plays it now seems to really like it. Steam sits at around 93% positive reviews. On GOG, it's rated 4.6 out of 5, and it's even part of the GOG preservation program now. Those versions have been updated to run properly on modern systems. They're verified for Windows 10 and 11 and still work through the DOS box. That's how I played it. Those numbers are still pretty small compared to the big PC classics that stuck around in the mainstream conversation though. But the reaction from the people who do play it says a lot. People are still stumbling across this game decades later and reacting to the same mix that critics picked up on when it first released. And honestly, after finishing it, I really liked it too. There are tons of first-person horror games out there. There are a lot of puzzle-heavy adventure games too, and retro-style shooters are everywhere now. But I still can't really think of another game that blends all these things together in this exact way. It really feels like it came from a time when developers were just throwing different big ideas into one project and seeing what would happen if they actually made them all work together. Gremlin pulled off a mix that actually worked well enough to get strong reviews, but the sales just weren't there, so it never really got the chance to grow into anything bigger. And even now, it's still kind of hard to pin down. Even after going through the whole game trying to explain it. The game is basically a first-person horror adventure game that pulls in almost every direction PC games were experimenting with in the mid-90s. You've got shooting, puzzles, exploration, FMV cutscenes, resource management, and this huge apocalyptic story all packed into one game. Some of it definitely feels dated, some parts require a lot of patience, but the game still has a weird, unique personality that you just don't really see anywhere else. I really don't think there's anything else quite like this one.
One ugly mother.
And that was Realms of the Haunting. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe. There's already a lot of content like this on the channel, and there is always more on the way. If you want to help the video grow, leave it a like or drop a comment. Did you play this one when it first came out? Have you ever heard of it before this video? I'd love to hear what you think. And of course, I want to give a quick shout out to all the channel members, along with everyone who supported the streams for this game through Super Chats. I really do appreciate you all so much. But again, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you all for watching, and as always, I'll see y'all later.
Belial and Florentine are dead.